In 1974, Deng Xiaoping told the UN General Assembly, and I quote,
中国现在不是，将来也不做超级大国。超级大国就是到处对别国进行侵略、干涉、控制、颠覆和掠夺，谋求世界霸权的帝国主义国家。如果中国有朝一日变了颜色，变成一个超级大国，也在世界上称王称霸，到处欺负人家、侵略人家、剥削人家，那么世界人民就应当揭露他、反对他，并且同中国人民一道打倒他。
that China is not a superpower, nor will she ever seek to be one, unquote. Over half a century later, it is evident that the Chinese government did not honor Deng Xiaoping's commitment. And the strategic competition between China and the United States increasingly defines our regional, global security environment. However, we must not overemphasize this reality. Doing so unfairly portrays the legitimate actions taken by smaller states, carried out as being carried out at the behest of major powers, as if we were mere pawns with no strategic agency of our own. In that spirit, I would like to reiterate that the Philippine position on the West Philippine Sea is not a function of Sino-American strategic rivalry. Instead, it is caused, no doubt, by the overreach of the Chinese Communist Party, of which the most glaring evidence is the 9, 10, or 11 dash line that has absolutely no basis in international law. President Xi Jinping has declared that, quote, China must lead the reform of the global governance system with concepts of fairness and justice, unquote. However, what the Chinese government considers fair and just may stand in stark contrast to the norms and values accepted by the rest of the world, especially the smaller countries. To envision a China-led international order, we only need to look at how they treat their much smaller neighbors in the South China Sea, which runs counter to the, quote, peaceful rise they, unquote, they initially promised. Before I close, there is an issue we need to address. We are all here as stewards of our country's provenance and our country's collective responsibility towards maintaining global peace and security. I was just talking to future youth leaders. However, we must realize that the gap between the educated and the uneducated is widening in the world. And countries need to address this gap because a populace which is unable to perceive the benefits of multilateralism, that lose the facility of critical thinking, are easy bait for one-liners, disinformation, misinformation, and propaganda, which may run counter to general peace and stability of the world. Ladies and gentlemen, we are in the midst of a global transformation. Still, we must ensure that our international system, however it evolves, remains grounded in the rule of law, the undistorted rule of law, particularly the United Nations Charter, which respects the political independence, territorial integrity, and notional sovereign equality of all states. Evidently, this system has not always functioned well. However, for all its shortcomings, there is no preferable alternative to the rules-based order, especially for the security, prosperity, and survival of smaller states like the Philippines.
From China, Qizhang.
My question is for Defense Minister of the Philippines. Recently, the US Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, said that the Russian-Ukraine war is a proxy war between nuclear powers and needs to be ended. And meanwhile, the United States is selling more arms to this region and setting up more military bases in the Philippines. So, if the proxy war in Europe needs to be ended, are you concerned that a proxy war in Asia might be launched? Thank you.
And also from China, Da Pengqi.
Thank you, moderator. First, it's a very brief comment. Actually, I really appreciate the viewpoint made by Deputy Prime Minister from Thailand. He said we should push forward cooperation and unity, not the division. So it is inappropriate for the minister from Lithuania to attach a label on China, and it's clear a rhetoric for division here in Asia. And my question is for the Philippine Secretary of Defense. As we know, both Vietnam and Malaysia have differences with China in South China Sea. Yet, both countries have effectively managed these differences with China. So my question is, why can't the Philippines do the same? And yesterday, Malaysian Prime Minister Anwar mentioned he advised your president to engage dialogue and communication with China. So will the Philippines follow his advice and change its current approach to the South China Sea issue? Or does the Philippines intend to act as a proxy for external powers, continue to serve as a shadow in the shadow play, as described by Singapore former Defense Minister An Yong-hun at this year's Munich Security Conference? Thank you.
Let me address the questions by group. First, on ASEAN 2026, I'm not at liberty, unfortunately, to disclose the theme of ASEAN 2026. That will be the province of our Secretary of Foreign Affairs and the President of the Philippines. But it will follow, definitely, with logic, Malaysia's theme of inclusion, inclusivity. I believe ASEAN members take special pains to have a follow-on for sustainability and continuity of themes set by leaderships of the current countries hosts for the following hosts. The other question would be the ASEAN solution to the South China Sea. I think I won't go that far. But what I can say is that ASEAN should not allow other parties to define what ASEAN centrality means, and not to use ASEAN's perceived action or inaction as a wedge to drive divisions amongst us. And so, and we also had a consensus that we are evolving common positions. And the mere fact that we have members in ASEAN with overlapping claims but we deal with each other in a cooperative and peaceful manner shows one thing. Because of our behavior, we trust each other not to take unfair advantage of the situation. And this is the spirit that must continue in ASEAN. Next would be if the Squad is open to admitting more members. I believe that as the Squad matures and gains momentum because of the synergy and the purpose against shared threat actor, a lot of people who may perceive that they are or may be victimized by the aggressive behavior of that threat actor will want to join. And then we cross the bridge when we get there. On defense cooperation with Europe, certainly, because knowledge knows no boundaries, technology knows no boundaries. And as I said earlier, we know the challenges, the threats facing us. We know who are the actors behind it, and the smaller states have an interest to cooperate, to preserve our territorial integrity and sovereignty. And this is the spirit of multilateralism. It should know no borders. However, there should be a common understanding that we fight for the UN Charter and UNCLOS. Now, to our Chinese interlocutors, I shall address you collectively. And thank you for the propaganda spiels disguised as questions. First, the comparison between the Philippines, Malaysia, and Vietnam. Let us not forget that while we are members of ASEAN, we are sovereign countries, each with its own territorial integrity and sovereignty. And I am sure that if what China is doing to the Philippines is done to Malaysia or to any ASEAN country, you would see a different reaction. And certainly as an ASEAN brother, the Philippines will stand up with that ASEAN brother in time of need, in support and in defense of what is international law and UNCLOS. As members of UNCLOS, we are all committed to support it. On the dialogue with China, unfortunately, in my personal opinion, the fact that the question was asked in the way it does, it engenders a deficit of trust in China's words vis-a-vis its actions. I just look back to 1995 on a place called Mischief Reef. There were a few bamboo structures erected there, and China said that these were temporary havens for fisherfolk. Now you have an artificial military island, heavily militarized. China says that it has peaceful intentions. Why does it continue to deny the Philippines its rightful provenance under international law and UNCLOS? And as proof of this, we do not stand alone. No country in the world supports the 9-line claim of China, or the idea that waters within this 9-dashed line are internal waters of China. Several countries in the world, no less than 50, have joined the Philippines in condemning China's behavior in the South China Sea. None have agreed with China, and none has condemned the Philippines for standing up against China in the face of a threat to its territorial integrity and sovereignty, for which I thank the members in this chamber right now for your support. And thus, for dialogue to be effective, it must be coupled with trust. And China has a lot of trust building to do to be an effective negotiating partner in dispute settlement. We have to call a spade a spade. And that's what we see, and that is the biggest stumbling block to dispute resolution or dialogue with China. That deficit of trust, which I think any rational person or any person that is not ideologically biased with freedom of thought and freedom of speech will agree with me. And lastly, external policy sometimes is a mirror of internal conditions, and vice versa. I, for one, cannot trust a country which imposes, represses its own people. I hope I have answered the propaganda to the satisfaction of everyone in this room.